All right, thanks for being with me. I am Johnny Robertson. We're live here on What Does the Bible Say? And we are hitting off on our Exodus class today. I appreciate you being with us. We have had a couple of, we didn't have a break. We actually had a show last week where we inserted some information, like some of the preaching that I'm doing on the book of Exodus. And so for those of you who are using this class as a tool, like getting ideas or whatever, we're inserting those sermons in there to demonstrate how it is that we make application, or we bring Exodus to the pulpit and then we make the application. So we hope that you are getting something out of this today. You can see that both Caleb and I are available constantly. I think last Wednesday I did a broadcast I did a school at 8 o'clock at night as opposed to 1 in the afternoon. And so when I got home, a gentleman from West Virginia, he talked to me to at least 11:30. And so these are some very hard hours that we're working here. I know that Caleb has to get up really with the rooster on Wednesday. I have to on Tuesday. And we're giving you these, we want you to have our numbers so that you can get in touch with us. I prefer, if you want something, like if you need some books or whatever, you text me, tell me your name and address, name and town, name and town, name and town. We get so many emails where a person just says, I want books, and they don't even tell us who they are. And like my email, Joe Blue, if you get an email from Joe Blue, how are you going to know who that is? So in the subject line, I put my name in there so you're going to know it's me. So that's my email, joeblue81@gmail.com. Caleb is Caleb G. Robertson. Just remember that G, Caleb Robertson, but you got to have that G, Caleb G. Robertson @gmail.com, joeblue@gmail.com. There's my cell phone number, and there's Caleb's cell phone number. And so we do like to hear from you. We want to hear from you, but we would remind you that we are doing 28 hours a month of live television between the two of us. That's a lot of TV, 28 hours. That's half a work week for most people. And we work a day job. We both are locally employed here. I'm working with the Martinsville congregation. He's working with the Danville congregation. We have full-time jobs. We preach just like any other preacher. We're doing outside studies, outside talk, following up on all kinds of stuff. Last week we were interviewed by Channel 13, and that was just like a whole day that was shot. And I do mean shot with cameras. We started early in the morning, and I don't remember when we got through. I know that Caleb had to rush to Charlotte right after that was over. And so Charlotte is 2 hours and 10 minutes, something like that from us. So just the reason I'm saying that is remind yourself, how would you like to be called at 10 at night after you had worked, just say 28 hours that you normally don't work in a week. And so we split that, so that's 14. Somebody might say, oh, y'all don't work but 14 extra hours. Well, listen, when you're already working 60 to 80 hours and then you put 14 more hours on that, and then you call me at 10 o'clock at night, I'm going to take the call, but I'm going to be wondering, do these people know what kind of schedule we're running? So y'all be kind, practice the golden rule. And so let's go on with it then this morning. One of the greatest blessings that we have had in the 20-year period that we've been doing this is this little icon right here, YouTube. We're able to put this up simultaneously. Like today, you can call a friend and say, what does the Bible say is on? All they have to do is get on the internet, type in my name, Johnny Robertson, in the YouTube. Just go to YouTube first, then type in Johnny Robertson in the YouTube line. Likely, if you just go to Google and type in Johnny Robertson, you're going to get one of our shows, and you'll be there. And so what you do is you just basically type on, once you get to one of our shows, if you see my face up on the website, let me just do this for you right quick. We've got plenty of time. Let me settle myself down. We've got plenty of time. Let me show you what I mean. You'll come to, let's just say you're on my YouTube. This is what it's going to look like. And if you are watching a video, let's say, for instance, this one was dialed up for you.
Yes, sir.
You just basically go down just a little bit, and you see my picture down there? When you can just click on my picture right there, no matter what video you happen to be on, you click on my picture right there, and it takes you to my actual channel. And you can start seeing, today, you would see the first thing would be live. You click on that, and you're ready to go. Or tell your friend, that's what they do. They're ready to go. Then you can start looking through the videos right down here. and you're ready to go anytime, no matter night or day, 24/7. And these classes also are archived as well. So great blessing. We have people from their upper 80s, even in the 90s age group that are watching this. They've learned how to use their computer. They've learned how to use their smartphone. That's the greatest part of it too. You can watch this while you're on your way to work. And it is just a great blessing that we've been blessed with. And so this morning, we have just a great opportunity, just all kinds of greatness going on here. Have a great opportunity in that we have this time with you, and I hope that you're having a good time. I hope that Corona is not being too bad for you, and I really do hope that you're getting your Bible and your pad and your pen out, because we're going to discuss some things I think that will really cause you to be informed. I know that for sure. And we're also going to be getting into the text in a way that will hopefully create a awareness. And that's what we really are doing. We're creating an awareness about God and about God's presence in your life that possibly you're not aware of. That's too many awares. We're trying to make it so that you can begin to realize a certain thing that will help you be much bolder, much more courageous, and also at peace. Having an inner peace and a determination to get out there and try to accomplish things, great things for the Lord. And here's how we're going to do that. Now, this is really the beginning, as we said last week, this is the beginning of Exodus. If you really get down to it, when Moses penned all of this, he was putting the information in place so that these people could know as they're going along. Let me see if I can develop this thought just a moment. I want you to think about this. Now, you might say, well, the people that were with Moses, they went through this, so they know what is going on. Moses doesn't have to tell them. Well, in fact, that's not really the proper way to look at things. Why is Moses penning the book of Exodus to people that lived through the Exodus? Well, let me ask you this. If you're living through something, do you know all of the many-sided or many facets of all the things that are going on? Let's say, for instance, is you are going through the Passover. Do you know what's going on in Pharaoh's house during the Passover? No, you don't. But given the fact that God gives the information that He wants them to know and wants their posterity all the way up to us, what He wants us to know, we're getting to see things that really have a purpose, and God's the one who's putting it there, and He wants to make sure that we get it. So I want you to think about that again. You went through the Exodus, therefore no one can tell you what went on. That just can't be true. That's like going through a wreck and you think you know everything that happened in the wreck. Well, you may know things that happen in your driver's seat where your head hit on the steering wheel and how your knee feels, but the people out there who were watching you have the wreck, they can tell you things about the wreck that you would never know. And by getting all that information, and somebody might run up and say, you skidded 150 feet. And you might say, I don't care about that information. Well, this account is not that way. This has the essentials, is what we're trying to get people to realize. If you're reading this, if you're studying this from God's vantage point, from what He put in the record, you're getting what God thinks is important and what you need. And here is what you need. So, Genesis arrives. What great day is this? And Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions therein and grew and multiplied exceedingly. Now they're in the land. This is really the beginning of the Exodus, really the Exodus account. Why? Because you got to get somewhere before you can exit. Well, how did they get there? Here it is. They have entered into the land, and it is by a very, very powerful process. We're talking about 200-something years of prophetic waiting. Abraham was told in Genesis 15 that they were going to be there, Genesis 15:13, and he said unto Abram. Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in the land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. Then Genesis 15:16, but in the fourth generation they shall come hither again. I would encourage you, even if you do know this, to go back and read this and remind yourself of the state of mind that Abraham was in. Abraham had just rescued Lot, and because we know how it feels or what is written about a war, you know, a lot of people go into a war and they aren't always thinking about what's going to happen on the other side of the war. Once you go into a battle or have a fight, individuals who didn't see you as a threat, they now recognize, you know what, this dude's a threat. He has just taken Lot back from the kings that took over Sodom and Gomorrah before it was destroyed, and he brought Lot back, and he brought all the spoil and gave it to all these folk in Sodom. He didn't want anybody saying, you made me great. Well, how do I know that that creates that kind of angst in a person? Like, you think Abraham knows that everybody's looking at him? All you have to do is go to Genesis 34 and read what Jacob says to his sons Levi and Judah when they created a tremendous victory, just slaughtered the people of Shechem. And what did he say? You made me stink in front of the people of the land. What that really means is, you know what? We were kind of coasting under the radar here, and y'all have gone in and slaughtered all these people because they violated Jacob's daughter and their sister. And once they slaughtered these people, now people are recognizing, hey, these folk, you know, they kind of seem like a tribe of very peaceful individuals, but yeah, I don't know about that. So do you see what I'm saying? That's the context. When you open up Genesis 15, God is consoling Abraham. Abraham's just come out of that, and he's consoling him. He's telling, I'm with you. And then Abraham ends up hearing the covenant again, and then a great darkness and a horror comes over him, and he sees this, or he dreams this. It's revealed to him that in the fourth generation, or it's revealed to him that they're going to go into a foreign land, and they're going to be there, and they're going to be afflicted. There's going to be a 400-year period, and that God is going to judge that nation, and in the fourth generation, they're going to come back. We're there. Over 200 years, 200 and something years from that point, and now we're back. We're there. Now, this is something that we need to key in on. Now, I'm just going to ask you, did you see this in the other verse? One of the things that we all need to realize is, and what God is trying to teach us, like the purpose of giving it to us this way, and the purpose, my plan for bringing it out this way is so that you can get this. Do you think God actually is able to see you? I'm saying, what do you think about going through life? Are you on a constant basis thanking God because you know what, I know one thing, God can see me. God can see you. Well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, let's back up. Let's look at it again. Now look at this. He says in verse 13, they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterwards they shall come out with great substance. Now, basically what God is telling them is, I see what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen, and I know the other side of it too. It's the case that God's going to bring them back out. Well, look at Exodus 3:7. This is very, very tightly connected. And the Lord said, this is Moses at the burning bush, and Moses is fleeing out of Egypt himself because he has made a judgment between individuals that are fighting, and he ended up killing an Egyptian. We'll get to that text when we get there. But notice, he is now in the land of Midian, or he's out in Sinai, somewhere in that area, and he's come to the Mount of the Lord, and the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of the taskmaster, for I know their sorrows, and I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. Now let's go back and look. You see, this is basically the message that you're supposed to be getting by the fact that it is presented 200-something years beforehand. If God saw it and God revealed it to Abraham, then that means that while you're going through it, God knows that you're going through it, and He sees it, and it's not like He isn't aware of what's taking place, but evidently He has a purpose that needs to be brought out, and this is a part of it. This is a part of the action that it takes to bring that out. Now, I want you to think, you might say, now, wait a minute. You know, if I'm going to be in this portion where I'm being afflicted, I don't know that it really matters to me if God is seeing me or not, because, you know, I'm still being afflicted. You know what? Y'all, we've got to come with the realization that everybody does not get born in peacetime. You know? I mean, if you're 40, take it back. If you're 60, or if you're 50, if you're 65, it's pretty much that you were born in peacetime. I don't know much about the Korean War, but I know in the 60s we had a few threats, like Russia had a rocket either pointed at Cuba. Probably the idea was is at Cuba. I know we live close to an arsenal in Texas, and it was a big scare around Arkansas and Texarkana and Texas in that area. And so, but we were pretty much born in peacetime, and then Vietnam came along and everybody's getting drafted. And then after that, another peacetime, Cold War. But you see, my point is, listen, everybody can't be born in peacetime. There's got to be different times where people have to fight. There's different times where their trouble comes up. And, it, you know, just like right now, here we are in the midst of the coronavirus in 2020, and almost the whole year has just been gritting your teeth. A lot of people, I haven't been gritting my teeth because I have been looking at all of the things that God is accomplishing that needs to be accomplished. And I know this passage, this lesson too. So that's the point. You might be saying, I don't want to be afflicted. But the answer to that, or the return from God, is everybody can't be born in peacetime. Everybody can't basically have it their way. God has a purpose here. And so these individuals, their great-great-grandfather has been told that they're going to go in there, and Moses goes out to the burning bush, and guess what? God references it. Look, I've seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt. God can see you. Y'all, God knows what you're going through, and we've been through this already. In Genesis 20, verse 3, Abraham needs to learn this. What do you mean? Abraham was sure that Abimelech did not fear God. As a result of that, Abraham told Sarah to say that she was his sister, which she was, but it put her in danger. And Abraham needs to learn that God can see him and that God can take care of him, especially since God hasn't even begun to fulfill the promises associated with Abraham. He told Abraham he was going to have his own son. Well, he doesn't even have a son yet. He has a son from Hagar, but that's not the son that God had promised. He promised a son from Sarah. So Abraham ends up learning this lesson. Abimelech takes Sarah in, puts his eye on her, and he's looking at her like for a wife. And God says in a dream, but God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, Behold, thou art a dead man for the woman which thou hast taken, for she is a man's wife. Now, Abimelech ends up saying, look, I did not mean to do this. And God said, I know you didn't. I know that it was the integrity of your heart. You were innocent. And so he's revealing it to him to save his life too. But the point is, Abraham needs to learn that God can see you. You need to learn that God can see you. See all these passages that we have gone through in Genesis as we move up to Exodus, Genesis 16:13. Hagar did not know in her affliction that God could see her. Genesis 16:13. This is a really important passage because Sarah asked, basically, Sarah watches her handmaid have a child, and all of a sudden in Sarah's mind, the handmaid is more important than she is, and she has Abraham cast the handmaiden out, cast Hagar out. Look what the Bible says, Genesis 16:13. She called the name of the Lord that spake unto her, Thou, God, seest me. For she said, Have I also here looked after him that seeth me? Wherefore the well was called Bir Lahoroi. Let me do this again. Let me see. Bir Lahoroi. Okay, Bir Lahoroi. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. Now, the name of the well has to do with God seeing her affliction, and she realized that God actually could see what was taking place. And so she was brought back to the household of Abraham. Now, let's notice again, Hagar again. In Genesis chapter 21, verse 16, notice this. Now, this is more intense this time around. This time, Sarah has seen Ishmael, the son of Hagar, doing something to the new infant weaning age Isaac, and she's not happy with it, and she ends up having Abraham get rid of Ishmael. Like, I want the handmaiden cast out, and her son, they're not going to be in the house. They're not going to be raised with our child. And so this is what happened. Hagar went and sat her down over against him a good way off, as it were a bow shot, for she said, let me not see the death of the child. Here's the question. Hagar, do you not realize that God is watching right here? He sees this too. Let me not see the death of the child. You already been in this situation once. And God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said unto her, what aileth thee? Hagar, fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him in thine hand, for I will make him a great nation. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the bottle with water and gave the lad to drink. Now, how about that? Hagar is having to learn this as well. This is another account. Now, here's the question. Do you get tired of going through difficulties and then coming through them? Well, the question may be that you might need to ask yourself is, when are you going to learn that God can see you? That's what we're talking about, isn't it? These are accounts where individuals more than once went through similar situations and they despaired, and it's easy to despair. Each time that you go through a trial, it has to be stronger than the last time. You're learning from each one of these trials, and the next one is going to be, sometimes you can have the same trial over and over. It just, it could be the case that the idea is to get you just to be weary of having the exact same trial. And that's sometimes more difficult than a whole, bucket full of different trials, or a bag of tricks that are all different. You can sometimes just get weary of having to deal with the same thing. A wife may say, I'm tired of dealing with this same thing over and over and over my entire marriage. A husband that won't obey the gospel. Well, the design of that trial is to wear you out. But here's the thing. Are we taking note of the fact that God is watching this? And He has a purpose that is being accomplished. Well, what could be that purpose? Well, if you're a person who, let's just say, has a husband that has not obeyed the gospel and isn't obeying the gospel, you have children, your children are going to need to learn a lesson about patience and dealing with the trials and tribulations of life. Well, who's their teacher? Maybe you are designed to be their teacher. Maybe that's exactly what is happening here, is that once you learn your lesson and you begin to handle this in a different way, because see, that is the point, isn't it? The more we go through things, it gives us more opportunity, it gives us more endurance, and we begin to handle it better, and we end up seeing things on the other side oftentimes. And so we could be our children's teacher. They're learning from us. I watched mom and dad go through awful tribulation and trials and difficulties, but they tried not to murmur, and they stayed the course. And guess what? When you pass on and they're by themselves, they will have those memories, and you were their teacher. But if you moan and complain and murmur, you know what? I don't really think they're going to want to go through these things, because they themselves said, well, mom and dad were not happy. Why would I want to put myself through that? See, you're actually teaching them. You're setting the wrong example in front of them. And that's why this lesson is here. This is exactly, I guarantee you, this is exactly how this is lined up over and over and over. Now watch this. Watch the manner in which God teaches. Genesis 21, Abraham listens to Sarah and gives in to send his 16-year-old son away and his mother. And this is a terrible ordeal. It's a terrible ordeal for Abraham. It's a terrible ordeal for Hagar. It's a terrible ordeal for Ishmael. But Hagar, again, sees that God sees her. And she ends up finding a wife for Ishmael. And Ishmael becomes, we see Ishmael much later at the burial of Abraham. But watch this. The very next chapter, Abraham's willing to listen to Sarah, and he's willing to put his handmaid out, who is actually the mother of his son, and he gives in to that, and then look what happens. Genesis 22, if we were to go back to chapter 22, verse 1, we would hear that God now says, Abraham, I want you to offer your son, your other son. Oh, wait a minute. This is getting a little bit difficult, isn't it? I just listened to my wife, and I'm trying to make her happy, and I've just sent away Hagar. He loves Hagar. That's the mother of his firstborn child. He loves Ishmael, but the difficulties at home are such that he gives in to Sarah, and the next thing that he now has to deal with is he is now in the position that Hagar and Ishmael are in. He is now called upon by God to offer Isaac, his only son, begotten of his beloved wife, Sarah. And God tells him in Genesis 22, I want you and the lad to go 3 days' journey. I want you to go up on this particular mountain, and I want you to offer Isaac. And that's exactly what Abraham did. He and Isaac traveled with some of their servants at the foot of Mount Moriah. They stop. They leave the servants behind. They take the things they need for the sacrifice, and they go up the mountain. And Abraham is confronted with the exact thing that he confronted Hagar with. The possibility of his son dying, the very real idea of his son dying. Now, I don't know what in the world Abraham was thinking when he sent Ishmael and Hagar out. That's just a terrible part of that story. I have not really, I have studied this thing, but I'm saying as far as all the ramifications that are associated with it, it's a study in and of itself, and I know it's condemned in Deuteronomy 21. That's not something that God allowed to happen on a continual basis. That is, sending out the son of your wife that's not the beloved, and even not giving that one the first place as birthright. God stopped that in Deuteronomy 21. And so I'm saying we're seeing that it wasn't the best outcome. So now Abraham is in the same situation. Look at him. He is now offering. They have the altar in place. They have the wood on the altar, and he binds Isaac and puts him on the altar. And just before he completes God's command, he is stopped, and a voice basically says, and he said, lay not thy hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him, for I know that thou fearest God. Now here's the key right here. Look. Seeing. You see that? Let me see if I can get my finger right here. Seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son. See, God is watching this. And he is seeing that Abraham is willing to give Isaac back to God, who gave him to him in the first place. He is actually going through the same thing he just put Hagar through, and he is going through it. He is willing he's willing to give his son and not withhold him, to be obedient unto God. Now watch how this goes. Next, this is not the next verse, but it is Genesis 22:14 in the context. And Abraham they actually caught a ram in the thicket, and they offered the ram. And in verse 14, Abraham called the name of the place Jehovah-Jireh. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. And the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of heaven the second time. This mountain is the same mountain upon which the crucifixion of Christ took place. This ends up being the place where they built the temple, and that's why it is said, as it is said to this day, in the mount the mount of the Lord, it shall be seen. What shall be seen? The offering of God's only son, which was pictured in this event, Abraham offering Isaac and getting him back from the dead, as it were. He received him as a result of God's power. He was not able to have children with Sarah, so in a way he actually received him from the dead. And then when he was in his mind killing him, he believed that he could get him back from the dead, that he would be raised from the dead, because God had said, in thy seed, in talking about Isaac, I'll bless all the nations of the earth. So There's no way that he could bless all the nations of the earth if Isaac died, but he believed that God would raise him back from the dead. And so in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen, Jehovah Jireh. This is basically something that was put in place so that all of them will remember. God is seeing this. Now, are y'all getting this? This is basically what is playing up when we get to Exodus. God planned this whole thing, and he has another plan that is going to take place as we go along. Now, notice, what do you think about Jacob? Do you think Jacob is comforted in regard to going into Egypt? Because Jacob is the grandson of Abraham. Now, where did we start? Genesis 15, 13 through 16. Jacob is the grandson of Abraham. Do you think that Jacob knew the prophecy that they were going to go into a foreign land and that they were going to serve those individuals and be afflicted, and then in the fourth generation come back out? You know he did. You know he was going into that land with knowledge that at some point this event was going to turn south, as they say. He's going in now comforted. His son is vice president, you might as well say, vice regent, or he is second in command only to Pharaoh. He's getting placed in a very, very particular part of the land. Some say the area of Goshen is, in fact, one of the places where most of the most renowned pyramids are that are still left, that it was a great area to live in, and they were very, very, very blessed. We know that from Genesis 47 through Genesis 50. But in the back of Jacob's mind, he also knew that his progeny, his posterity, his relatives to come, great-great-great-grandchildren likely, were going to be the individuals that were going to go through all this pain. But Jacob also knew this because he himself lived through it. Notice this, Genesis 31:42. Jacob is fleeing from his father-in-law, trying to get back to the land of Canaan after having been in servitude to Laban. And notice this, he heard Laban say this, Genesis 31:42. Except the God he said this back to Laban. He knew that Laban had gone through this, and that's why he ends up saying what he says. He fled he was already 3 days' journey with his sheep from Laban, and he fled without telling Laban that he was leaving. And Laban is chasing him, and in verse 42 he says, except the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac, that's my dad, except for the God of Abraham, except the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely thou hadst sent me away now empty. God has seen my affliction and labor of my hands and rebuked thee yesternight. Now I want you to think about this. What did Abraham do when Lot was mistreated? He went after him and defeated an entire army. Well, what is it that Laban knows about Isaac? You think Isaac is going to allow Laban to mistreat Jacob? Well, Laban may not have been thinking about that as much as he should, but when he catches up with Jacob, that's what he brings up. Look, I know that you are afraid of the God of Abraham, and you're afraid of my father, and if it hadn't been for that, there is no telling what you would have done. And the reason that you're not able to send me away in the way you planned is because God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked thee yesternight. Now, is that not comforting? Notice this. This is Genesis 31:24. We were in 42. Let's go backwards. Genesis 31, verse 24. Previous to him fleeing, Genesis 31:24, and God came to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said unto him, and this is what Jacob is referencing. Jacob knew that Laban had had a vision. Take heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad. You better not mess around with Jacob. You don't be talking to him rough. You don't be threatening him. You don't be saying, I'll do this for you, whatever. Don't be trying to trick him. You just basically don't lay your hands on Jacob. Jacob knew this, and he references it to Laban as Laban starts trying to put the guilt trip on him. Why did you do what you did? Notice this. Are you aware of this scripture? When Jacob gets ready, or when he starts thinking about what he's going to do, he's been serving Laban 14 years for his 2 wives, and then he has to serve him even longer in order to be allowed to take his belongings, like the things, the cattle that he's raised, the sheep that he's raised, the flocks that he's raised. He's had to jump through all kinds of hoops while Laban is trying to trick him. And in Genesis 31:9, as he gets ready to go, he talks to his wives and he says, "Thus God hath taken away the cattle of your father and given them unto me." As a matter of fact, Genesis 31 verse 9, let's look at this. Folks, I don't know how you respond to what people do to you. I don't know if you take it like personal and you end up saying, you know what, I'm going to respond because, you know, these people, they're doing me wrong and I'm going to make sure that I get even. Look, verse 8, let's look a little at the context. If he said thus, the speckled shall be thy wages, then all the cattle bear speckled. And if he said thus, the ringstrake shall be thy hire, then bear all the cattle ringstrake. Thus God hath taken away the cattle of your father and given them unto me. When you really get down to it, he basically tells his wives that God has taken everything from their father. They end up agreeing with him, and notice what they said to Jacob. They end up saying, "For all the riches which God hath taken from our father, that is ours and our children's. Now then, whatsoever God has said unto thee, do it." Okay, Jacob, you've convinced us that all the things that we've actually seen our father do to you and to us, we now see that you have come out ahead, and God has given everything that Laban had and turned the plan, the dastardly plan that Laban had to fleece Jacob and his own daughters and his own grandchildren. It has actually turned around on him, and God has given Jacob everything. Now, what does that mean to you? What is that designed to teach you? Is that not designed to teach you that God sees the stuff that people do? I mean, when you think of that verse, Genesis 31:9 it's one of those, man, it's one of those verses, you know, you have these people that wear those bracelets are used to. What would Jesus do? WDJD. You seen those? This is one that I would use for a bracelet, or a one that you would post on your post outside or on your forehead, like they were told to do in Deuteronomy 4, Deuteronomy 6. It's like you need to memorize this. What is it? Genesis 31:9. Here is an account where a man just used every kind of stealth that he could use, and what happened? God overcame it. And the way Jacob was able to deal with it is Jacob knew that God had seen him. He had seen him on his way running from Esau. Jacob had laid down and had a dream, saw angels descending and ascending on a ladder back from heaven to earth and earth to heaven again. He had seen the angels again on his way back crossing the river. Jacob knew about this, and the thing is putting it into place. Well, how do you might be asking me, how do you keep this uppermost? You have to go over it, and the fact that it's multiplied so many times. Notice this. You know, when you're having trouble, and we all have trouble like this, there's constantly individuals that will put a bad spin on what we do, or they'll talk about our motives and things of that nature. Have you ever noticed Deuteronomy 19:15? This is a good place for you to see it in context. Notice this. This is basically how God sets up judgment. In other words, if there's a judicial system, this is the way God sets it up, and God expects it to be dealt out or poured out. Deuteronomy 19:15. One witness shall not rise up against a man for any iniquity or for any sin. If any sin that he sinned, At the mouth of 2 witnesses or at the mouth of 3 witnesses shall the matter be established. Well, there's a lot of people say, I don't know about that. I don't really know that I'm going to bother with that. Now, there's 2 persons in this. It's the person who's doing the talking and the people who are doing the hearing. Both of them often will skip. They'll just say, it's a lot of trouble to have 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses. I want to hear it from their mouth. Well, how are you going to get it from their mouth? Well, this one witness is going to tell me what the other witnesses say. No, that's not going to work. That's not how you hear it from the mouth of the other witness. You have to hear it from the witness yourself. Well, no, this witness told me what the other witnesses said. No, you're still listening to one witness. Well, I don't want to go to all that trouble. I don't want to go to the trouble to pick up the phone and call these witnesses and see if what this witness said happened really happened. Well, guess what? You're being disobedient, and you might say, well, I'll take my chances. Well, let's just look at this. Have you ever seen the context of that? The context of it is exactly what we're talking about right here. Notice this. In Deuteronomy 19, let's look at verse 15. He gives the rule. This is the judicial law. This is judicial rule. It's still in place. You'll see it in 1 Timothy chapter 5, and you see it in Matthew chapter 18. Now look at this. Let's just see if you really want to not take the trouble. Man to testify against him that which is wrong, then both the man between whom the controversy is shall stand before the Lord, before the priest and the judges, which shall be in those days. Now, notice this. The judges shall make diligent inquisition. Behold, if the witness be a false witness and testified falsely against his brother, then shall you do unto him as he had thought to have done unto his brother. So shalt thou put the evil away from among you. Not only will you stop this instance, but you will actually stop this kind of behavior, because individuals will end up seeing what transpires. Well, what are you talking about, seeing what transpires? Here's where you see it. In Genesis 31, you actually get to see Jacob see again, because Jacob's already seen again and again and again. Abraham saw it again and again and again. Hagar saw it again and again. What are they seeing? Folks, what is our point? God sees you. What's the point of what we're talking about? They're in Egypt because God prophesied it. God spoke it was going to happen in just over 200 years in Abraham's life, not in Abraham's life, but from Abraham. This was a prophecy that was sure it was going to happen. There is a design, and now they're going into the promised land. And affliction is going to be associated with it. God sees that. In Exodus 3:7, that is what God is telling Moses. I have seen their affliction. Well, is it really good for you to know that God can see you? Yes, it is, because what happens if you don't? Well, if you don't, you might be one of these people that will do what is said in Deuteronomy 19. You will either make a witness against somebody just out of your say-so, or you might be a person who is hearing this kind of thing, and you might decide, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and listen to this. Well, this is a very good warning, if I ever saw one, that you ought to think about such a thing, and that it really isn't something that you would want to do. What do you mean? Well, Laban lost everything to Jacob. Everything Laban intended to do to Jacob, Jacob had it turn around, and Jacob became the recipient of all the things that Laban was going to take away from him. Same thing here. Whatever the false witness intended to do to you, it's going to be done to him once the diligence has taken place, the inquiry has taken place. And someone might say, well, what is this going to create or stop? Let's look at Romans chapter 12, verse 18. Now look at this. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourself, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. You see, if a person realizes that God's seeing all this, God sees you. He's seeing all the stuff that's going on. Well, do you realize that I'm being mistreated? And Did you think that you would get to be at peace all your life? Well, it does say live peaceable, as long as it lies with you, live peaceably with all men. Well, sometimes it's not possible to live through peacetime. Sometimes you end up being living in a life like Jacob was living with Laban. What do? You recognize God sees this. Well, does that mean I just lay down and let people roll over me? No. What it basically means is you trust God and you just try to go ahead and set an example in front of other individuals. Don't be trying to revenge and get even. Basically, put it through your thinking process over and over. Maybe every day you have to go through that same thinking process and say, is God watching this? Absolutely. Is God going to do something about this? Absolutely. Oh man, you might find yourself praying for individuals because you start seeing the things that happened to Laban. Would you want that to happen to any of your relatives or anybody that's mistreated you? You just like, they lose everything? No. Well, see, if you do have this in your mind, if this principle is in place, look what it makes it easier for you to do. After he says God will repay, then he asks you to do something that many people think is impossible. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. See how that works? A person will never respond like that unless they truly believe that God sees them and God is watching the situation. So, where are we? We're entering into, this is the introduction for our lesson. Now I'm asking you this question. This is the question that I asked you when we started looking through the God sees you. God can see you. He knows what you're dealing with. This is what I asked. Was Jacob comforted to go? Genesis 46:3. Right before he went, not actually before, he's packed up and he's going. Genesis 46:3. And he said, this is God, he's seeing a vision again, seeing the angel, and he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. This is how you're going to become a great nation. This is the process. And in Genesis 50, verse 23, it is said that Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation, the children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were brought up upon Joseph's knees. So, it is a very comforting thing to see how that this all worked out. Joseph and his father were actually apart for 22 years, and the last 17 years of Jacob's life he spent with Joseph in Egypt, and he was comforted. He spent the end of his days in comfort with his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren, and Joseph himself saw 3 generations, his children, his grandchildren, and his great-grandchildren, and you see the purpose of God being completed. Now, what are we saying? The purpose of God being completed? We're actually seeing the children of Israel, which is Jacob, they're in an incubation period. You might even call it an incubator. They're in the land of Goshen. They're in a place that is separated from the Egyptians pretty much, and this is giving them a chance to multiply. Now, I want you to think about the passages now that we're entering into. And I think really at this point that we are very ready to have this thought process. So, all we've done, we're doing well on time. Let's just go ahead and read the context. It was 7 verses. I skipped 6. We'll just go ahead and open it up. I'm sure that you have read ahead. Exodus 1:1. Now these are the names of the children of Israel which came into Egypt. Every man and his household came with Jacob. Now I would like for you to do I'd like for you to accomplish a homework task for me, if you would. Do you realize how many times from the time that Jacob goes into Mesopotamia, Padan Aram, Genesis chapter 28, Genesis chapter 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, all the way to here we are in Exodus. Have you considered how many times that he has named the children of Jacob? I'm not asking you to memorize these names. I'm asking you to go back in your studies and see how many times God has gone through their names. He's gone through their names like this. He's gone through their names and told who their mothers were. He's gone through their names and just so many different ways he's gone through their names. And I would like for you, as a homework assignment, to go back to Genesis 28 and read. It's like, be curious. God is wanting you to know these people. He has gone through this so many times. I think that you'll just be astounded the amount of times. And in Genesis 6, he's going to do it again. You're going to end up seeing this over, and you're going to end up seeing some time added to it. He wants you to get this. Why? Because this is your, can I actually put it this way? This is the template for your life. What does that mean? Well, when you have a template, let's say, for instance, you're looking at your weekly church bulletin. You know, that bulletin, the person who's doing that bulletin, they don't create that thing anew every week. They actually have certain things that stay the same. The name of the bulletin is the same. And when a person starts putting in an article, they don't have to go up there and put the name, the informer, in there again. It stays there. It's a template. A template is something that you actually have, and it's maybe like a track to run on, if you want to use that metaphor, that kind of idea. This is your track to run on. This is your template. You lay this down, and you see all these characters, and then you compare the things that are happening to you to the things that are happening to them, and you begin to realize, you know what? Let me just open another right quick. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. Here's what you begin to realize. If you put this template down and you really get it in play, in other words, you get it where your mind is constantly looking at this, here's what you're going to end up having. You're going to realize, there hath no temptation taken you, but such is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that you may be able to bear it. What if the way is looking at the life of Jacob and realizing that what's happening to me right now already happened to Jacob, and I see how Jacob handled it, and I see that God could see Jacob, and that God was going to work it out on the other side. Now you think about that. So, what if the way, you know, people are looking for all kinds of ways to get out of situations. And instead of realizing, you know what, if I had the Bible laid down as a template for my life, and I had all of these stories, and they all just would run like, you know, just like a reel, the movie reel, the scenes would just start kind of, you know how when you're on your phone and you're looking through your pictures and you can't remember where that picture was, so you just basically open up and you just start scrolling down. So you got 3,000 pictures on your phone, and you just start scrolling and you start looking for the one you're looking for. And you know it's in there because you've got those pictures in your mind and you know they're there. Why is it the case that we don't do God's Word this way? The lives that individuals in the Bible lived. Why don't we do that with them? Well, it could be this morning because you have not been convinced yet that that's the way for you to escape. All of these accounts are actually life stories, and you think about the life stories that are contained in this book, how many there are, how many different webs the devil has woven that tries to trick and trap individuals. And as you see them disentangle the web that has been woven, the trap that has been set, the snare that is right in front of you, as you see them miss those, or you even see them get in them, and so, you know, I know New Hampshire is watching. I was thinking about in carpentry, I was going to say a jig. I wasn't for sure that a template was the right thing, but I know that I was raised up by a bricklayer, and we would put a template up for an arch. The carpenter would have to come along and they would build a template, or if we had several of these, they would just have it sitting there, and we got ready to build this arch. We would put a wooden template up under there, and we would start building around that, laying our brick right across that template, and then we would end up finishing out the brickwork. So see, there's so many different ways that this can be used. Same thing in when you're talking about, I know these are all men ideas, but women, some women sew. Lori was sewing something of mine just the other day. Women have a pattern, it is called, and so the way to escape, it could just be as simple as this. Don't take vengeance. Wait on God. Believe that He sees you. And you might say, oh man, you are really pushing this thing, because you're talking about how many years did they have to wait? Well, I think I can convince you that that's a good thing too. All right, let's go ahead and catch up here. So what was the assignment? The assignment was find out how many times. I think you're going to be surprised when you look at the different times that this list is put forward, and number two, how detailed it becomes from time to time. So Reuben, what are we doing? We're looking at the names of the children of Israel, which came, every man and his household came with Jacob. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher, and all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation, and the children of Israel were fruitful, and increased abundantly, and multiplied, and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. Now, let me stop right here. Exodus chapter 1, verse 7. And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied. Now, I've been trying to get you to read ahead. I'm not saying necessarily I want you to read ahead in Exodus for sure, but I've been trying to convince you that Numbers, Leviticus and Numbers, parts of it run concurrent with the account here in Exodus. And when we stop at Exodus 1, verse 7, I want to show you something. I want to prove something. I don't know if I have this written down. Exodus chapter 12. I know it's Exodus chapter 12, but I forget which verse it is, but I'll give it to you right quick. I want to give you a heads up here that this is a bit of a clue to what's taking place. 12:38. Notice this. And a mixed multitude went up also with them, and flocks and herds, even very much cattle. Let's see, Exodus 12, verse 38. Am I looking at that right? Exodus chapter 12, verse 38, 37. I was not looking at that. The children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot that were men besides the children. Now, this is the Passover. This is where they celebrate the Passover, and then they head out of Egypt. And what do you find in Exodus chapter 12, verse 37? 600,000 footmen, about 600,000 footmen that were men beside children. Now, you might be saying, okay, Numbers is 2 books over, and yet in Exodus 12, it tells us how many individuals were in the army. Well, y'all, I want you to think about this. God gave this information to Moses, and Moses put it in a book. And the fact that you know in Exodus 12 how many footmen there were, and Numbers is 2 books over, don't you want to think that through? How is it that Moses knew how many footmen there were when Exodus 12 was being put down? And you might say, put down? Deuteronomy 31:26 take the book of the law and put it in the side of the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be there for a witness against thee. The book actually contained Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So Moses is getting this information on Mount Sinai, and the information is being given to him to give to the people. Now, you remember what we said about when you live through something, you don't need someone telling you what was going on? Well, how would you have known? Let's say if you're in the tribe of Judah and you're in the tribe of Levi and another is in the tribe of Ephraim, how would you know how many people were in the tribe of Ephraim and Levi if you're in the tribe of Judah? You might say, I don't know. Well, I know if you looked out there, you would see a sea of individuals, but you would not know exactly how many people are going with you. But if you're able to have God picking out what you need to know and what your next generation needs to know, this is how he did it. He actually tells in Exodus chapter 12 what is the result of something that happened in Numbers chapter 1, 2, 3, and following. So again, what I've been trying to get you to do is to realize that you're going to be the loser if you do not read ahead and realize that the information in Leviticus and Numbers is going to come up. It's just going to come up just out of nowhere, and you're going to need to already be ahead on that in order to really get the picture the way God has laid it out. You know, it's a lot like some books that we read, novels, or even I am like one of my life's goals is to, I'm not ever going to run in politics, but I just have this yearning not to have been spoon-fed what happened in World War I and World War II and what led up to World War I and what was going on in World War II, and to be able to tell, was Hitler really the way that he's depicted by individuals who want to narrate history? Are the Russians the way that they're depicted and narrated in history? Is Great Britain the knight in shining armor the way historians depict it for English-speaking people? You see, we're at a great disadvantage to a certain degree because we speak only one language. And all of the history that we read generally is in English and has been translated from other languages, and the persons who do the translating, often they don't care to translate things that would give another view, and those things lay hidden, and the only people who know those stories are the people who can read that language or speak that language. And you might think that's not very important, but I can tell you, from living overseas, I have a totally different perspective about the American Indian as opposed to the history that's been narrated to us by the individuals who were the winners. You think about history. History is mostly penned, it is mostly narrated by the winners. You think somebody's going to be reading The Losers like it's going to be the #1 bestseller, The Loser Story? Well, it might come out 100 years later, 70 years later, The Loser Story might come out and you actually get to read from a different perspective. But the chances of you getting to read the loser side, very slim. So what are you reading? You're reading history that was narrated by the winners. Do the winners always tell the truth? Absolutely not. Do they cover up themselves? Absolutely. Are we paying millions and millions and millions and millions, and I could just go on for the rest of the show and not get to the millions of dollars that is going over into the Marshall Islands? Are we paying reparation over there? Absolutely. Why? Because we did our atomic testing over there and blew some islands to smithereens and actually affected many thousands of Marshallese with radiation. And what are we doing about it? We're paying them reparation. Is it doing them any good? Well, the individuals who died from all of that radiation poisoning, no, it's not doing them any good. Was it doing their children any good? Not doing their children a lot of good either. Those islands can't be resurrected that were blown up, and the ones that are affected are still affected, and I'm getting to know that because I live there. And the horror that I saw as a result of being able to see for myself as opposed to be the narration by the winners is so valuable. It's actually invaluable. And so what was my point? I'm wanting to read and understand how things really happen. And you know what? I am not about to put my hunger for history associated with finding out if Great Britain is really a knight in shining armor, or were they just as imperialistic as the Japanese, and now we may be in the process of doing the same thing to the rest of the world. I'm not saying that we are, but I'm saying I want to be able to do something besides be spoon-fed. Well, I'm not going to let my hunger for that override my hunger for my template for my life. This other is brain candy. All of this history that I'm going to be reading, that's just my brain candy. That's me getting to, like, it's a bit of a hobby. This is life. This is everything that pertains to life and godliness, and it is narrated a certain way, and we need to make sure that we're realizing how valuable that it is. So here we are. Verse 7. Again, we know now that by the time they left, they had about 600,000 footmen. That is a good standing army, y'all. If you've got a standing army of 600,000 individuals, that is a very good army, and that means that you are a very populous nation. There are a lot of people that have to make up husbands and wives, mamas and daddies, to have 600,000 in a standing army. So, notice this. And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied. Let's look at some words here. This word multiplied, swarm or abound, breed forth abundantly. Let's look at this other word. Let's see, that was multiplied. Was I on multiplied? That's abundantly. Fruitful, to bear fruit, bring forth fruit, cause to grow, increase, multiplied. Somewhere in here is the idea of growing like fish. At least that's what I thought I found earlier, metaphorically. Fruitful. Now here's what I'm going to ask you to do, those of you that have our Bible program, is you click these words and you look through the words, and when you say, well, how do I look through the words? No, sis, we're going to take fruitful. I'm going to click it on, and I'm going to drop this down. Now watch this. All right, here's your word for fruitful. And so you have the meaning right here. Now watch what you can do when I say look through it. When you're looking at a word like, let's say you're looking at a word like light. Well, when you look at the word light, there's going to be derivatives of that word. Like when you start looking through it at derivatives, you'll end up finding out that it may be a light bulb as opposed to the sunlight, depending on whether or not the language that you're reading has different ways of saying the same thing. So I just looked down, and the next word is, let's notice how close they are. 6509 is this word that we're looking at, bear fruit. 6510 is so close to it, but it ends up being like cows, heifers, fruitful like a heifer. What does a heifer do? Heifers, if they're with bulls, just continue to have offspring, and sometimes their offspring are actually twins. Well, what's the word that is just above it? It has the same root. You can see that, P-A-R. The root and the root is very close. And what does it mean? A foreign origin, a park, a forest, or an orchard. Well, be fruitful like an orchard. How does one grape planted, what does it yield? It yields a lot of grapes. So what's actually being said here is that the idea is that they're being fruitful in a way that is like somewhat amazing. They're going to end up producing in how much time frame? I want you to think about this. Let's do it this way. If you were reading prior to Exodus chapter 1, and it's part of your homework, so you will actually end up reading it you find out how many children each one of Jacob's children had. Well, for instance, what you find out is that Benjamin had 10 children. Genesis 46, I'm basically hoping that I'm whetting your appetite by doing this. I ask you to do it as a homework assignment, but I'm going to give you a little bit of encouragement. And the sons of Benjamin were Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Gera, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Muppim, Huppim. How would you like to have those two names? Twins, probably. Muffin, and Huppin, and Ard. So 10. Now, you think about this. If Benjamin had 10 children, and all of Benjamin's children had 6, do you see how fast this would multiply? I mean, you can get your phone calculator out, and in just about 4 generations, if they keep doing that, if they keep multiplying, we didn't even do it by 10. We said 6. Let's do it by 8. In about 4 generations, you have 30,000 individuals if they continue to multiply in this fashion. You're compounding is what you're doing. It begins to, after the 3rd generation, it just begins to explode because the numbers are so big. And before you know it, you've got 600,000 in your standing army. And so, did you realize that's how you end up, folks, we need to realize that there are skeptics that are reading this information also. There are individuals that don't believe the Bible. And they're basically saying there is no way that they could have increased to have a standing army of 600,000. And, well, why not? Well, just because it's just unrealistic to even believe such a thing, that they could have that many people in that short amount of time. I don't know why you would say that. It's because you really haven't thought about it. And if somebody challenges you, what would you say? Would you be able to say that, well, for instance, Benjamin had 10 children and another one of the brothers had 6. And so if it's possible that they're multiplying in this fashion in the 1st generation and numbers compound once you move to the 3rd generation, and now you're working with greater numbers, that you're working with times tables, you're not working with plus tables anymore. And before you know it, do it on your computer. It will explode right in front of you. And the next thing you know, you will have the numbers that you read of in Numbers chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and you'll realize that you could have a standing army. So what are we actually talking about? We're demonstrating how this happened, and we're also going through to get to this point right here. We're wanting to convince ourselves that God is seeing this, and we're looking at Moses at the burning bush. God is seeing the affliction, and that's the point that we want to make sure that we got in this first segment of our lesson. When you get down to Exodus 3 and Moses moves out and the persecution really begins, all of a sudden you end up hearing that there were 600,000 people in the army. God sees their affliction, and God is going to deliver them. The question this morning ends up being, do you really want to be delivered the way they're going to be delivered? The other question is, do you want to put things in God's hands, or do you want to take the reins? Now, I'm going to take a commercial here, and I'm going to tease you with an event that took place last week. Let's see if I can get down to the actual event.
But what we're
in the Virginia
church is against the proposed casino. 13's Kristen Morand finds out
war on gambling.
Give me just a second. Sometimes it's really hard to get to the first of a thing. All right, let me step out of this in a minute. Who's my producer? So, Daniel, can you do magic and let me disappear? But I'm going to still talk. I'm wanting to disappear and let this commercial play. But when I'm going to tease it in, okay? And then you make me disappear, so I can step off camera just a minute. You ready for me to tease it in? All right, I'm just going to tell folk about it. Okay, some of you may have gotten tired of our casino shows, but listen, y'all, this is a very important battle that we've got going on here in this area. We don't want a casino to come into Danville. Danville is a very depressed area. Danville lost like 19,000 jobs, somewhere in that neighborhood, when one of our mills left in 2000, when it just totally shut down between 2004 and 2007. It wasn't an immediate amount of numbers right then. It was just like a constant dribble until all the workers were laid off and Dan Mills just shut down. And so our leaders, our political leaders, basically think bringing in a bunch of hoods associated with the casino crowd is going to be our savior. And so we've been fighting this really hard, and the other religious folk in town, they haven't been putting their voice out there. I think they're actually scared that they're going to lose their tax exemption. And so, Daniel, if you make me disappear.
Can you tell me what we need to do?
I'm just...
Do I need a break?
Yeah.
What do we need to put on?
Nothing. I'm just going to play this commercial just long enough for me to get a drink.
Gotcha.
And so if he can do the switcheroo and make me disappear, I'll be happy.
Waging war on gambling in their area.
ABC 13's Kristen Morand finds out why a local church is against the proposed casino.
A father and son duo who Danville Church of Christ are telling me that they're rallying against the casino. Their church isn't a traditional one. In addition to their regular services, they have a live broadcast on TV for folks in the Virginia and North Carolina area, and also have a YouTube channel. Recently, Johnny Robertson's son Caleb started a series called Studying Sin Seriously to compare the Bible to modern day teachings and hot topics. His most recent hot topic, the proposed casino. Both feel like they're one of the few churches against the casino and feel like this goes against their beliefs.
But what we're operating under is Jesus saying, treat your neighbors as you would like to be treated. The only way that I can win and other people can win at the casino is if the other players who are my neighbors, if they lose.
Now, I asked Caesars for an on-camera interview. They declined, but released a statement saying, quote, the city will be able to devote $38 million in annual local tax revenue toward education, infrastructure, and other Danville priorities. Also, the entire community will benefit from the development because of the investment, business growth, and tourism the resort creates. Now, their father and son duo also tell me that their members and viewers are right there with them against the casino coming to Danville. Live in Danville, Kristen Morand, ABC 13 News.
Okay, we're back, and I have another segment that I'm going to let play, but I'm going to stay in it. I'm just going to back away just a little bit. So, upon doing the commercial or having the news media catch up with us, Baptists end up speaking up as well, at least one does. And the particular thing about this particular Baptist guy, I'm not faulting him really, but he really has something to lose in that he owns a restaurant. And if you're a restaurant owner, like O'Kelly's, then it's a guarantee that a casino is going to take away customers, because casinos generally, when they have their own restaurants, there's one in Indianapolis, Indiana. It's actually not in Indianapolis, it's in Shelbyville, Indiana. They have their own in-house, the whole thing, the resort, and they had, before the pandemic came along, they actually had a buffet that was $2 and some change. Now, can you imagine trying to compete with that? That's pretty stiff. So I want to let you go ahead and see one of the Baptist restaurant owners going ahead and saying something as well after our commercial.
In Danville, a casino is on the table, and one popular restaurant says it's bad for the city. Our Kristen Morand is live tonight, breaking down what they believe that.
The owner of O'Kelly's isn't so sure the city of Danville needs a casino to be built on this school field site.
I think it's a waste of money and time for the city of Danville to even consider stooping to the bottom of the garbage can to bring business to this town.
Gerald Kelly says he is 100% against the proposed casino. As a local...
Okay, I kind of think that's comical given the fact that no church has had any coverage that I can think of as far as the casino is concerned. Pretty much there's signs out in front of that establishment right there, and they say no casino. But none of the signs that I have seen have any church recognition on them. Like, for instance, you have no idea if that's a political campaign that put those signs out there that said no to the casino, vote no. You don't know. You have no idea. The churches absolutely are not standing up to this. And so as a result of our determination to do that, we ended up being in this, being a part of this commercial. And you might say, well, that was a short clip. Let me tell you, that came on the 6:30 news in Danville, and this Channel 13 covers one of our, it covers from Danville, covers the city of Lynchburg, which is a large city, all the way up to Roanoke, which is a tremendous amount of broadcast area, all the way into North Carolina as well. And so this whole area that they call Southside saw that commercial, and you might say, well, that was just such a little blip. That commercial was the lead-in to every single commercial. Our segment, which was not a commercial, our segment on the fact that the Danville Church of Christ is opposed to this, and openly so, and as the anchor said, waging war on the casino, that piece was the lead-in to every single commercial on the 6:30 segment, the 6:30 to 7 segment. In other words, every time they went to commercial break, you know that part of going to a commercial break that you hate, where they tease you and say, coming up, local church wages war on the casino, and you have to wait till the entire show goes through until you finally get to see that last part that they've been teasing you with. So they basically teased in Caleb through the whole news broadcast, and then towards the end we were on there together. And so, hey, that's what we've been trying to do. We hope that you weren't bored with those. It's a very important thing to us, and it's an important thing to our area as well. Now, let me just move ahead now. And what we were talking about is these individuals and the multiplication and the fact that they had a standing army. And we're also saying that this information it's layers, y'all. We want to finish out the rest of the broadcast this morning by trying to encourage you to get what is there. When we talk about studying by subjects, this is basically what I'm getting at. This is the illustration. Proverbs 2:3. Yea, if thou criest after knowledge, and liftest up thy voice for understanding, if thou seekest her as silver, and searchest for her as for hid treasures, then shalt thou understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. Now, when you think about your Bible's accounts, the information that's in here, y'all, do you realize that you're never going to get it until you treat it right? Now, one of the things that we have to recognize is just for instance, the Exodus theme is mentioned over 100 times. Now, you ever stop and think about something like that? The theme is mentioned over 100 times throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. That tells you that this is a pivotal point in the history of the Bible. Like the people that are in the Bible, this is a very pivotal point. It's a point that you want to make sure that you don't miss. And so I'm going to demonstrate just a little bit and show you how pivotal it is, and how if you don't get this basic premise associated with this part of the Exodus, or just the Exodus, if you don't get this pivotal point of the history of Israel, look at this. In Judges 11:16, And when Israel came up from Egypt and walked through the wilderness under the Red Sea and came to Kadesh. Now, Judges is a long time from Egypt. And here in Judges, they're talking to the people that are basically historically Amorites and are kin to Sihon, and they're talking to them about Israel coming up out of Egypt. And look at verse 26. Now, I know that little segue was probably hard to get, but just think about Judges 11. You don't know how far Judges is from Egypt, but now you're about to. Judges 11:26. While Israel dwelt in Heshbon and her towns, and in Aroer, that's a hard one, Aroer, and her towns, and all the cities that belong to the coast of Arnon, 300 years. Why therefore did you not recover them within that time? So they're talking about Egypt, and they have moved. Look how far they have moved from the time of the Exodus. And yet they're using a reference point, and they're expecting these individuals to remember it. So look at 1 Samuel 6:6. Now this is the Philistines, and what's taking place is that Israel has had a battle with the Philistines, and they've lost the Ark of the Covenant. This would have been the sons of Eli take the Ark of the Covenant out to battle, and they are so wicked, the Bible calls them sons of Belial, and they take the Ark out and they expect that it's going to turn the tide, and it didn't, and the Ark of the Covenant was captured by the Philistines. And look what the people in the Philistine army are in the hierarchy of the armed forces. Look what they end up saying about what to do with it. Wherefore then do you harden your hearts, as the Egyptians and Pharaohs hardened their hearts? When he had wrought wonderfully among them, did they not let the people go, and they departed? They're talking about sending the Ark of the Covenant back home because they are having pestilence, and they themselves are having sickness. Their God has fallen over, and then his head falls off in their temple. And as these people are thinking and looking at what's taking place, this is over 300 years from the point. Judges and Samuel basically are really the same thing. If you really get down to it, it's named differently because you start seeing less characters. You start minimizing, or your scope of what you're looking at is not as broad. You don't have all these different judges and all these different battles. You end up just narrowing it down to Eli and Samuel and Saul and David. So, but still, time has passed. More than 300 years has passed here. And what are they using as a reference point? What are the surrounding people talking about when they talk about Israel? The people around the children of Israel have never forgotten what God did to Egypt. So when we start talking about God sees you, and we start talking about the fact that Jacob was comforted as he went into Egypt, even though he knew affliction was around the corner, at least 2, 3, 4 generations, they still did it. Why? Because they have basically learned that God has a way of handling things, and the way God handles things, y'all, how would you like for your enemies to be afraid for over 300 years? Well, it's only been what? World War II is 1941's the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and then you continue on for what, 45, 46, 47. I don't remember when the armistice was signed or when the surrender was, but it was before 1950. And so we're at 70 years. Are people still afraid of us? Absolutely. People are still afraid of the might of the United States Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, the Army, the Coast Guard, whatever we have, the missile guidance system, things of that nature. People know that the United States has a war machine. And as a result of that, we virtually have peace on our continent for the most part. And you look back at this, is it possible for us to go 300 years and people be afraid of us? I doubt it. But God bringing Israel out of Egypt in the fashion that he did is a tremendous, the wisdom of knowing that, and that's what we were talking about, is we have to mine for the information. To believe this, that these accounts, the words of God, the information, the knowledge, the wisdom, the understanding, that all of this is like a treasure, and the persons who have it, they're going to be individuals that are going to be ahead of the game. They're going to be able to take the heat and take the pressure. And you might say, I don't want to take the heat and I don't want to take the pressure. Well, don't you want to be able to help others? Well, I don't care about others. You care about your kids, don't you? You care about your relatives, don't you? Your mama and your daddy, your brothers and your sisters, your children, your offspring, your nieces and your nephews. Somebody has got to be in there who is able to take the heat and take the pressure. Why? Because they realize these accounts, they've put them in place, and they're seeing the wisdom, they're getting understanding, they're getting knowledge, they're getting fear of God, and as a result, they're being rewarded just like individuals. I think I have a picture here of an area close to us. I didn't really check everybody's clothes here before I put that up. This is in Arkansas, very near to where we live, or where we're from. I believe it's in Nashville, Arkansas, somewhere around that, Washington, Arkansas. And it is a very well-known diamond mine. You go over there after a big, huge rain or several rains, and there have been diamonds that were laying just right up on top of the ground, and individuals found them. But there are people that are over there on a regular basis, and they're digging around and sifting around, not really having to dig that deep, and they find diamonds. Why do we not look at the Word of God that way? Why do we not realize that what we're looking at right here is a pattern that God is setting forth and showing us how it is that He brings His plans into play? Well, what are we supposed to be learning from this? Well, one thing you would be learning from this is that if you go through a tremendous warfare, what kind of warfare? Well, we're not talking about you signing up. We're talking about a different kind of warfare. When you're reading, what kind of warfare are we involved in? My mind just went blank. We're involved in spiritual warfare. It didn't go that blank, but it's just blank in regard to what I need to pull up in Corinthians. The warfare that we're in is a spiritual warfare, and it is very difficult for us to be in it. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, let's look at verse 3. 2 Corinthians 10, verse 3. Now, for though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not physical or carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. There are all kinds of strongholds. There are all kinds of things that the devil is actually pretty much got under control, and he's using as strongholds that need to be taken out in our lives. And so when we look at this, when we're looking at the way God works things, we need to realize that if we're paying attention, we are able to see how God operates. Now, one of the ways that God operates is you have to go through very difficult times. The devil sees you go through it, and it basically is the case that he knows when you are withstanding him, and that's extremely important because James 4, it tells us if we do withstand the devil, he will flee from us. And so if you're withstanding him, he only has a certain amount of time and a certain amount of length that he's allowed on his chain to get into your life. And so also other individuals. What do you think when you start talking about the physical enemies? We're not fighting a physical war in the sense that we're fixing to get our swords out, real swords and our real guns. That might happen if things get really terrible, but we're actually talking about not doing that. We're talking about our wits here. And so what do you think the value of individuals seeing you go through tremendous warfare and you come out the other side of it? What do you think that does? Here's what it does. 1 Samuel 6:6. Wherefore then do you harden your hearts? Why in the world would you try something with individuals that you know who have had many spiritual battles, and they stayed the course, and after some suffering and dealing with different things, they came through that? Would you not think, well, you know, it may be just wasting my time to go against this crowd. That's pretty much where we are to a great degree as far as denominational people are concerned. Nobody really wants to answer us. They're not able to answer us. You got people from South Carolina that have members that don't know any better. They called Caleb at home, and then got in a situation where they were on the phone with Caleb, and then the next thing you know, the preacher is begging Caleb not to involve him in this. Preacher's name is Rodney Cox. Why? Because we've gone through these high-pressure events, these situations that take a lot of intensity, and as a result, individuals, I'm pretty sure that when the guy, David, went down to Rodney Cox's church the next time, Rodney Cox was saying, why in the world did you get me into this? I'm saying that poor guy, he may not even have a place to go. And so notice this. In 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1, and it came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month Ziph, which is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of the Lord. That's 6:1. But look at 8:51. 1 Kings 8:51. For they be thy people and thine inheritance, which thou broughtest forth out of Egypt from the midst of the furnace of iron. Now, this is the dedication of the temple, 480th year after the children of Israel came out of Egypt, and they're still talking about it. It's like this is a State of the Union speech or something of that nature. And you're dedicating the temple, and what are you talking to the people about? Here we are, still intact, 480 years later, from the time that we were brought out of the furnace of iron, 21:15. Because they have done that which was evil in my, this is 2 Kings 21:15. Because they have done that which was evil in my sight, and have provoked me to anger since the day that their fathers came out of Egypt, even unto this day. So we have moved now to 2 Kings 21, and they are still talking about Egypt and how that they behaved a certain kind of way, like the children of Israel when they came out of Egypt, and they misbehaved all through the wilderness, and God had to punish them over and over and over, and he's talking about Manasseh being similar to that. So what's the point? Listen, this study that we're doing, you'll never get beyond it. You will never stop benefiting from it. They're talking about it. It's a warning. It's a warning to the people. It's a great moment of like awe and trembling and amazing. Put it together with the inauguration of the temple. It is used as a time signature from which to measure. And even their enemies think twice about messing around with the children of Israel and their God, because all of them have in their history books. Now remember what we said earlier? We said, who writes the history? These individuals have this in their history book as well. And that's amazing that it's placed there. And so here's the question. Are you going to be an individual that is that way? Or are you going to let this extremely important segment of the Scripture, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, especially at this point, get past you and not be settled in such a way that it becomes a pivotal point in your life? Now, let me look at my time just a minute. Let's move to another point. Exodus chapter 1, verse 8. Now, we just multiplied in verse 7 to the point where we have a standing army of 600,000, and now put the Egyptians in place. Now that you know what's actually being talked about, now there rose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto the people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Because you've done this study with me this morning, you know how mighty they are. They don't know how mighty they are. Who are you talking about they? Well, the Egyptians know how mighty they are. They can recognize these folk there is a tremendous number. And now we know, because we went to Exodus 12, verse 37, and we saw the 600,000 footmen. That doesn't mean that they have a trained army. It basically means that that's the people over 20, and that are not decrepit, individuals that are in their prime of their life. There's 600,000, about 600,000 of them. Well, the Egyptians see that too. You see it too. So now that we've put all that together and we're looking at this, we can see exactly what is taking place here in the minds of these people. And in verse 10 it says, "Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so they got them up out of the land, and so get them up out of the land." Now, what he's basically saying, what's being said here is, if we don't do something now, if our enemies come along, they would join our enemies and they would free themselves, because they are so mighty. There are so many of them. And so let us deal wisely with them. Now, here's the problem that we have. Most individuals do not actually pay attention. Like when you're reading and you see Exodus chapter 1, verse 10, and you're saying, okay, I want to know, remember what we said a moment ago about looking at a word? Let's do that with this. Let me just see what I have coming up here. Let's do that with this. Now, y'all, you're going to have to, I just don't know anything else to do. I mean, we're in a class and we're trying to figure out a way to talk to you about things that you've never used before. If before I came, I talked to Mark McMinnis, one of the individuals that you're probably very familiar with, having seen him on TV for 7, 8, 9 years. I was talking to him about helping another brother change his brakes out. And so I asked him, could he teach this other brother to change his brakes? And I asked him first, did he change his own brakes? We have the same kind of cars. And he said, yeah. So I said, could you teach this guy how to do his brakes? Well, you know, when you start learning how to do brakes, you're going to start realizing there are some specialized tools that you have to have, because there are some springs that are connecting your brake shoes, and you can spend like 7 hours into the night trying to wrestle with those with screwdrivers and pliers, needle-nose pliers, or you can actually realize that there's a special tool that it's by design. It will help you get those springs and the locking mechanisms associated with them off, and you just would not want to, let me tell you from experience, you would not want to tackle that job without those specialized tools. Well, you might be saying, I don't care about brakes. Oh, you care about brakes. You may not realize you care about brakes, but you care about whether your brakes work. Somebody else cares enough about your brakes probably that you don't have to worry with your brakes. But here's the thing. Nobody can save your soul. And nobody can keep you from falling into traps and snares except you. Now, there are individuals like me who it is my job. I try my very best to deal with as many people as possible. And I'm talking about literally as many people as possible to try to help them. That's why we're doing these broadcasts. But there's only so much we can do. But we can give you tools where you can outmaneuver people who are influenced by the devil, who are influenced by their own passions, sometimes don't mean any harm but are doing you harm. And you need to be able to work these tools, and they're out here, and for you just to think as a Christian, well, I don't need to work a concordance. Well, the very idea that we still have intact the Greek language, the manuscripts from which the English Bible came from, is a tremendous blessing, and it's not just a happenstance. So the fact that we have those manuscripts and many other kinds of manuscripts that are from the same period when the Greek language that was used from which we get our English Bible, that is a great blessing too. And then you might say, well, why? Well, if we just had the Bible, just the manuscripts of the Bible, it would be very hard for us to know exactly that these words are being translated correctly. But given that there are many manuscripts that are in this same kind of Greek, and it's going to be called Koine Greek, common everyday Greek. There are many manuscripts out there. What that basically means, let's just put the word out there, books and writings of different kinds. Why is that so valuable? Because there are individuals who translate those other writings and they get to see these same Greek words. And as a result of seeing these Greek words in other writings that are not religious, that are not biblical, but in everyday language, they are able to see those words, and they're also able to see the synonyms of those words that are used, and it gives them a working knowledge, and basically they put together a lexicon, which is something that a student can use, and it has the benefit of all these other documents that have been read over and poured through, and the persons are aware of how these Greek words are translated in everyday language, and that gives you confidence that they have not made a mistake when you come to reading it in your Bible. And you might say, what does that have to do with anything? What it has to do with is that we are so fortunate to have these tools in a form where we can just simply press a button, click a highlighted spot right there. You see that place where my cursor is moving around? That every time I move across it, it highlights. And this is our Bible program. And so when we're in chapter 1 and we get down to verse 10, we'll be able to look at a particular word that becomes extremely important, and that is the word, they dealt wisely. Now, the people are greater than we are. So what did they do? Let us deal wisely. Now, here's what we're going to do. This is that same exercise we were doing just a moment ago. You're clicking on your actual word, your Strong's word. Now, you don't have to have a Bible program to do this. You can simply get a concordance. A Strong's concordance is the one that I suggest, and this same kind of exercise is available there too. What you do is you're looking at the Strong's number, a number that has been allotted to this particular word, and you find out what it means. A primitive root to be wise in mind, word or act, exceeding, teach, wisdom, make, in order, it's the idea of be made wise, make yourself wise, show yourself wise, deal never so wisely, make wiser. Now, you might say that wasn't very much help. Okay, I'm going to speed this thing up just a little bit. Here's what you also have to do is you have to look at other places where this information is talked about. What are you talking about? Another place where Exodus is talked about? Yeah, we just showed you how many of them, 5 just a minute ago. But for sure, you're going to want to look at places in the New Testament. Why? Because in the New Testament, you end up having inspired writers closer to your time frame. We're talking about this being like 1900 years BC, and here we are, we're moved to Acts chapter 7, verse 19, which is 2021. So that is much closer to the time, and not only that, Luke is an inspired individual who is telling again what actually happened back there, and he's going to talk about the same thing, but he's going to use the Greek language. So look at this. The same dealt subtly with our kindred, and evil entreated our fathers, so that they cast out their young children to the end they might not live. Now, here's what we've got. We've got a much easier word for us to deal with. This is the Greek word for subtle. Crafty, against, circumvent, deal subtly with. And if you look down here, you can see this word. You have to start learning to think in English, like with root words. Sophistry. You ever use the word sophisticated or sophistry? As soon as you start using words like that, now what I've done, let me just show you what we've done. Here is our word, Sophia. Now, when you say the word philosophia, do you not hear Sophia? philosophy, Sophia. This is how you have to start thinking. You start listening for our English word, or you start realizing that some of these words are just moved over and they're connected with another word, philosophy. And just think of Philadelphia. What does that mean? So you have two different words, Philadelphia and philosophy. Doesn't that sound similar in the prefix? So one of them is the Greek word for love, and Delphia is brother, so that's why Philadelphia is called the city of brotherly love. Well, this is philosophy, the love of wisdom, Sophia. See how that goes? Now, this is actually the word, it says that 4680, and then it tells you, it's 4678, Sophia, and it tells you to look at 4680. 4680 is sophos. So, what is that? Clear, wise, and that, now is that not a very simple exercise that you go through and you start seeing, you basically start realizing what was taking place? And let me go back to my original spot here just a minute, because I forgot what the actual word that we were looking at was, 719. All right. Now that was a large word. We were just looking at the suffix on it. So here is the first part of it, and it's from two different words. We can look that one up real quick too, like the prefix. And often prefixes are just like our prefixes in the English language. And so I'm saying you're not going to get this like the first time out. As soon as you look at something, you're not going to be able to immediately see what's taking place. But this is what you're going to have to do. Well, why? You might say, why would I want to do this? Well, let me just move ahead a little bit and we'll see. Why would you want to do this? You want to figure out what they were doing that is called dealing with them craftily, subtly, and trying to overcome them, because they're greater than they are, so they're not going to just go with a frontal warfare. Here is the crafty, subtle, wisely thing that they ended up doing. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of one was Shiphrah and the other was Puah, and he said, when you do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then you shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. Now, I'm going to make this short so that we don't just like run out of time abruptly. The midwives did not do that. They refused to participate in this crafty, subtle reducing of the population of Israel. And so what ended up happening? Well, the king then has to go another way. And it says, Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. Now, I want you to think about this. You remember the business that we went through? This is a very dastardly plan. But you remember what we went through as we built up to this point? We spent the most of the morning showing you those verses that tell you God sees you. He can see you, and he sees what others are doing to you. And when Moses got down to the burning bush in Exodus 3 verse 7, that's what he said. I've seen the affliction. I see what's going on. Well, what's God going to do about it? You know, when I think about the way that God worked this out, I could tell you what I think about it, but actually, wouldn't it be better to hear an individual who saw it from a different vantage point? This is Moses' father-in-law. Exodus chapter 18, verse 10. And Jethro said, blessed be the Lord who hath delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of Pharaoh, who hath delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, for in the thing wherein they dealt proudly, he was above them. So Jethro calls it proudly. Let's see what the word is. the thing they dealt proudly is right here. The word is primitive root to seethe, figuratively to be insolent, to be proud, deal proudly, presume, presumptuously. So they actually thought somehow or other, they had it in their mind that they could deal in such a way with Israel and nothing would happen. And so we're being told that it was crafty in Acts 7 when we read from that account. We're being told here in Exodus chapter 1 that they were dealing wisely, which is going to basically be the same thing. And here in Exodus chapter 18, verse 10, it is proud and presumptuous. Now I want you to think about this. This is how God views the individuals that are trying to overcome us. Now, presumptuous people, oftentimes they will just set out to just walk all over you and not think a thing in the world about it. And sometimes it is the case that ends up happening. Why? Because you don't have it seated in your mind. You don't have this template laid out that God has done things and is setting up certain things so that individuals will learn that they cannot do that to you. They cannot just take advantage of you and think that God is not going to be watching and that our God is not going to be blessing you and helping you get through this. It may look that you're down. You may feel like that you're being trodden under, but that doesn't mean it's really the case. Exodus 3 verse 7, he's telling him, look, God sees this at the burning bush. God sees your affliction and he's going to do something about it. Now, have you ever thought about how this actually played out? Pharaoh was trying to get the midwives to drown the Hebrew babies, the male Hebrew babies. Now, how does that work out for them? Well, they couldn't get the midwives to do it, so they ended up having the Egyptian people. He had to include the Egyptian people in it. Now, you might be saying to me, Johnny, you skipped the part about them actually having this great toil. I didn't skip that. That's in there. They were afflicted and they were made to serve with rigor, but that wasn't the dealing wisely. That was just them heaping on burdens on top of the persecution that was associated with them killing their babies and the people turning on them and trying to kill the boy babies every chance that they got. But have you ever thought about how, like when you start to respond in kind, is there anything that would keep you from being just as diabolical and dastardly as the people with whom you're dealing? I think if you would think about this, that it will help you to try to deal with your enemies, particularly those who don't believe the same way you do. If you have this account like really laid out in your mind, it would help you not to be so inclined to treat them in a harsh, mean, and you might be saying, Johnny, of all people, you're actually talking about not treating people harsh and mean. Look, I don't intentionally be mean to individuals, but y'all, I have to stand up to what they put forward. I have to defend the truth, but at the same time, I have something that is generating in my mind that keeps me from being the kind of person that can't get along with them after that discussion is over. Like most of these preachers that I have debated, I can still talk with them. I can literally still call them up on the phone and they will answer. And when I say, this is Johnny, they start talking to me. Well, aren't they got so many recordings of them when they were on television with me? Why do I need some more recordings of them in a phone conversation? I don't need that. What I basically have positioned in my mind is this right here. This is Exodus chapter 14, verse 23. Exodus 1 is positioned, they dealt wisely, presumptuously, proudly, and God judged them. Jethro said he was amazed that God judged them and had power over all their gods. They were trying to drown our baby boys, and look what happened. Exodus 14:23, and the Egyptians pursued and went in after them in the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to pass in the morning watch, the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. And the Lord said, waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it, and the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The water returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all of the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. Now think about that. My Pentecostal neighbors are drowning in a sea of perdition that is called Corona, and they cannot heal a single thing. Folks, we need to realize that God is in charge, and these individuals are being taught a tremendous lesson, and we're hoping that we're helping you with a lesson for life that makes you the kind of individual that you need to be so that you can teach your neighbors and you can resist and help all of your family members to stay the course. God bless you. Always ask for it. What does the Bible say?